In today's episode, you're going to hear about a man who was given a terrible hand from the day he was born. But they say when you get lemons, you should make lemonade, and boy did he ever. And you'll understand what I mean by the end of it, because today's episode is about Ronnie Milsap. Welcome to the NC Everything Podcast. I'm your host, Curtis, and this is a weekly show where I talk about everything that has anything to do with North Carolina. Today's going to be a pretty short episode for two reasons. One, I don't have a whole lot of housekeeping to do. And two, the Ronnie Milsap story is a short one. And it's not because his life wasn't important. He just found something that worked, and he kept on working it. He's still working it to this day. But I'm not trying to jump to the end of the story, so let's go ahead and get into the content. Ronnie Lee Milsap was born in Robbinsville, North Carolina. And Robbinsville is the county seat of Graham County. That's up toward the mountains. Or I guess I should say that's up in the mountains. And you might notice I said Ronnie Lee Milsap. That's his family name, is Milsap. And two things. Yes, it's spelled with an S, but it's also spelled with two L's. Now, I'm not sure when he changed the spelling of the name, but obviously, somewhere along the way, he did. Now, he was born on January 16th, 1943, and he wasn't a healthy baby. He was born almost completely blind due to congenital glaucoma. Now, I've always heard that he was born completely blind, so when I done the research for this, that's when I found out that he wasn't completely blind, but just mostly. Now, his mama, being a religious woman, she thought that she was being punished, with Ronnie's blindness, and so she gave him to his daddy to raise. And I don't know what the backstory is on Ronnie Milsap's dad, but he ended up with his grandparents. And he was 1 year old when he went to live with his grandparents, but he didn't stay with his grandparents very long. At age 5, he went to live at the Moorhead School for the Blind in Raleigh. But even by age 5, he had an interest in music. He had heard church music, country music, so almost as soon as he got to the school for the blind, he started learning how to play several different instruments, but namely the piano. And even though he was kind of abused there, he was learning classical styles on the piano at the school for the blind. And when I say he was abused there, I couldn't find a lot of cases of it, but remember when I said he was nearly blind? Well, he's fully blind now. And that's because, according to my research, one of the instructors or somebody helping out, but an adult at the school for the blind, hit him in the head. And it didn't say why, but when this person hit him in the head, he lost the rest of his vision. And let that sink in just a minute. You're helping out or working at a school that's full of blind people. I think it's deaf folks too, but blind and deaf folks, they're coming to you for help. And this was the 50s, it was a different time, but they're coming to you for help, and this is how you treat them. They already have a disability, and this is how you treat these kids. Sometimes I don't know how to wrap my mind around how people treat each other. But remember what I said about turning lemons into lemonade? He got pretty good on the piano while he was there, and so when he was a teenager, he started a rock and roll band called the Apparitions. And this was a nice distraction until he went to college. And when he went to college, he went to Young Harris College in Georgia, and he got a full scholarship. Now, when he went to college, he had hopes of becoming a lawyer, but that music thing just was gnawing at him. And so he gave up the lawyer thing and focused on his music. Well, he graduates from college in 1962. But a year before he graduated, he started playing with a band called The Dimensions, and they were an R&B band out of Atlanta. And it was during this time where he released his debut album. It was called Total Disaster, and it came out through Atlanta's Princess Records. It was around this time that a guy named J.J. Cale hired Ronnie Milsap as a keyboardist. Now, J.J. Cale was already a singer and a songwriter, and one song he wrote was called Cocaine, and it was sang by Eric Clapton. And by 1965, he was in New York recording for the Scepter label, and he was doing kind of an R&B sound. And this is when he came out with the song, Never Had It So Good. Now, for legal reasons, I can't play any of this music for you, but I would suggest looking it up as I go along. That's That's one thing about my music episodes. You can pause me and have a little soundtrack going if you want. Well, in 1968, he moves to Memphis. And this is where he got a regular job playing at a nightclub called TJ's. Now, up to this point, he's come out with the album, and he got to tour with J.J. Cale, which is pretty cool, but he was still kind of low scale. But then in 1970, he played piano and he sang on Elvis Presley's Kentucky Rain. Now, it was in 1972 that he moves to Nashville, and then he meets a man named Charlie Pride. And Charlie Pride tells Ronnie Milsap that he needs to try singing country music. He's been doing this R&B thing, but he should try the country sound. He said it would appeal to a larger audience, at least in the Nashville area. And so Charlie Pride introduces Ronnie Milsap to his manager. And while he was in Nashville, he started performing at a place called the King of the Road. Well, his time in Nashville definitely helped him, and probably meeting Charlie Pride's manager, because in 1973, he started a relationship with RCA Records. And this is when he started kind of doing the country thing too. And he came out with 2 songs, I Hate You and The Girl Who Waits on Tables. In 1974, he did a rendition of Chris Christopherson's Please Don't Tell Me How the Story Ends, and he won a Grammy for that. Now, also in 1974, he comes out with a song called Pure Love and a song called Daydreams About Night Things, which is probably the first Ronnie Milsap song I heard. And both of those songs went to number 1. 2 years later, in 1976, Ronnie Milsap would join the Grand Ole Opry. At this time, he comes out with What Goes On When the Sun Goes Down and a song that won him another Grammy, I'm a Stand By My Woman Man. Now, Ronnie Milsap has, to me, a distinctive voice. I like the way he sounds, and I've heard some of his R&B stuff, but I think he was doing the best with these slower country love songs, I guess you could say. And speaking of that, in 1981, he comes out with my favorite Ronnie Milsap song, which some of you may have already thought about, and it was called Smoky Mountain Rain. And if you've never heard any Ronnie Milsap, I would definitely suggest starting with that one. That's a pretty good one. Now, he went back to the R&B sound when he came out with Lost in the 50s Tonight. And Lost in the 50s Tonight is a reinterpreted version of In the Still of the Night by the Satins. And he won 2 more Grammys for this song. And let's not forget that throughout all of this, Ronnie Milsap is blind. Now, no, he didn't hold the market for blind musicians. In fact, he was inspired at a younger age by Ray Charles. But it does put some perspective on my life anyway. A lot of people complain about menial things. And here's Ronnie Milsap winning Grammy Awards, and he's been mostly blind since the day he was born. And speaking of that, in 1985, he started his Ronnie Milsap Foundation for Visually Challenged Persons. This is also when he built his own studio, and he organized a publishing firm. And at this point, he was appearing on TV and touring all over the place, so he really had his hands full. In 1987, he covered an old 1962 Joe Henderson R&B hit called Snap Your Fingers, and he teamed up with Kenny Rogers to do Make No Mistake, She's Mine. And Kenny Rogers and Ronnie Milsap won a Grammy for that song. Button Off My Shirt and Stranger Things Have Happened were 2 songs he came out with in 1988. But this is when he started to die down a little bit. His next moderately successful song didn't come out until 1993, and that was called True Believer. Now, one thing that popped up in my notes was at some point during all this, he opened up a restaurant in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and he opened up the Ronnie Milsap Theater in Myrtle Beach. Unfortunately, both of these places have closed. Now, I go to Myrtle Beach every single year. It would have been really cool to see the Ronnie Milsap Theater. Now, in 1997, a song by Alabama called Christmas in Dixie comes out. 2 things. 1, I thought that whole album was a lot older than that. And 2, I had no idea that Ronnie Milsap worked with Alabama on that album. For the next few years, his career took another dip, or, just kind of got quiet for a while. He didn't have anything outstanding. But then in 2006, he was chosen as one of the inaugural inductees into the all-genre Music City Walk of Fame. His career gets a boost in 2007 when he re-released all of his RCA albums and he toured with George Strait and Taylor Swift. 2 years later, in 2009, he releases Then Sings My Soul, and that was a gospel album that was released through the EMI Christian Music Group. And I've actually heard some of his gospel off that album, and it's not bad. And I would say he finally made it to the top in 2014 when he was elected to the Country Music Hall of Fame. Now, one of my favorite albums that Ronnie Milsap is involved with was called The Duets. Now, in that album, he collaborated with a bunch of different artists, including George Strait, Willie Nelson, and Dolly Parton. And just last year, he released an album called A Better Word for Love. And that's just versions of a lot of his favorite songs. And today, Ronnie Milsap is 80 years old, with 40 number one country hits, 6 Grammy Awards, and 8 Country Music Association Awards. And that's Ronnie Milsap, y'all. I told you it wasn't going to be a very long episode. Like I said, once he found a good thing, he just ran with it. Pretty much from the time he got out of college and until today. But I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it brought up some memories, at least for me. I was born in 1983, so, I'm a little older than some of you, and I'm a little younger than some of you, but Ronnie Milsap was right there in my era, growing up with the country music. And I know I've had some 35, 40-minute episodes here lately, but I want to put in a few short ones, because not all my episodes are going to be 40-minute episodes. Sometimes there isn't enough to say. And the way I've handled that in the past, if you're a returning listener, I'll put together 2 or 3 different subjects in one episode, or two or three different characters in one episode, I guess I could say. But I wanted to give Ronnie Milsap his own episode. So I hope you don't mind. But if you do mind, visit the website at www.thencyeverythingpodcast.com, and there you can hit the contact button and tell me how much you hate the short episodes. And while you're there, you can listen to my audio-only backstock that all came before I got on YouTube. And I'll have links to all that in the description below or the episode summary, depending on if you're watching or listening. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're getting the NC Everything podcast, because not only does it boost my ego, but it helps other people find the show. Now, I got a really good suggestion from Kristen in Greensboro today. I don't want to spoil it, but I'm kind of excited to dig into that research, although it's still going to be probably 4 or 5 episodes from now, maybe. But I want to go ahead and get ready for it. But before I can research that episode, I got to edit this episode, and so I better get going. But I'll talk to you next time. The music in this episode comes from archesaudio.com and freepd.com.